Nicole Carter's laughter bounced off the glass walls of her corner office like bullets ricocheting in all directions. At your age, Diana, we need hungry young talent, not expensive legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches. She couldn't finish the sentence without another wave of laughter shaking her shoulders, her Harvard MBA degree gleaming on the wall behind her like a trophy of superiority. I stood there frozen in that sterile corporate space, clutching my portfolio of 14 years' worth of achievements, watching this 35-year-old CEO with her perfectly styled dark hair dismiss everything I'd built at this company. The leather folder in my hands contained documentation of every major project, every system I'd architected, every late night I'd sacrificed while she collected bonuses large enough to buy vacation homes in the Hamptons. I'm Diana Foster, by the way, 46 years old, Director of Data Architecture at CloudCore Technologies. And until that moment, the kind of woman who believed hard work eventually gets recognized. The kind of woman who stayed loyal to one company for 14 years, while watching 26-year-old analysts with half my experience and twice my enthusiasm for buzzwords get promoted over me because they understood Instagram better than legacy enterprise systems. My husband Michael calls me stubborn. My kids think I'm from the Stone Age because I still prefer documented processes over casual Slack conversations. But what Nicole didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that my so-called outdated approach had kept their precious data infrastructure running flawlessly for over a decade. While she was getting her MBA and learning about disruptive innovation, I was in server rooms at 2 in the morning making sure her billion-dollar company didn't crash. The data migration project I designed saved the company $3.2 million annually, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. The security framework that prevented 4 major breach attempts last year alone, including that ransomware attack that would have cost us everything. The predictive analytics system that Nicole waved her hand dismissively, still chuckling as she leaned back in her ergonomic chair that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her office was all glass and chrome, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston Harbor, modern art that looked like someone had thrown paint at a canvas and called it genius. Everything designed to intimidate, to remind you of the hierarchy. Everyone's replaceable, Diana, even senior engineers with decades of experience. If you think you're worth more than what we're paying, try your luck elsewhere. She stared at me with that practiced CEO smile that never reached her eyes, the same smile she wore in those quarterly all-hands meetings where she talked about us being one big family. Maybe it's time to think seriously about early retirement. Book clubs and yoga classes are nice this time of year. I felt something crack inside me, not my heart exactly, something deeper and more fundamental. The foundation of 14 years of believing that eventually experience would matter more than age bias, that loyalty would be rewarded, that the company I'd helped build from a 40-person startup into a 1,500-employee corporation would remember who got them there. I understand, I said quietly, collecting my portfolio. The pages trembled between my fingers as I tried to maintain whatever dignity I had left. Through the glass walls, I could see my colleagues pretending not to watch, their heads buried in their monitors, while they straining to hear every word of my humiliation. Listen, Diana, Nicole's voice shifted to that artificial tone of concern that managers learn in leadership seminars. You're good at what you do, I'll give you that. But you're expensive. The board sees a senior engineer pulling $135,000 when we can hire 2 fresh computer science graduates for that same price. They've got energy, they understand modern frameworks, they don't need handholding. That's just business, nothing personal. Nothing personal. As if 14 years of my life was just a business transaction. As if the nights I'd stayed until midnight debugging critical systems while she was networking at wine tastings weren't personal. As if missing my daughter's dance recitals and my son's basketball games to keep this company running wasn't personal. That's when I knew exactly what I would do. The realization hit me like cold water, washing away 14 years of corporate conditioning and people-pleasing. If I was just a replaceable part in her business machine, then maybe it was time to see how that machine operated without me. I walked back through the open plan office to my corner workspace. Yeah, workspace, not even an office. After 14 years and a director title, I still sat in what was essentially a fancy cubicle, because open office culture promotes collaboration and innovation. My desk was wedged between two recent graduates who called me ma'am and asked me to explain basic concepts, like why we couldn't just rewrite our entire legacy system over a weekend. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across rows of standing desks where 24-year-olds in athleisure were typed frantically on MacBooks, building tomorrow's technology on the foundation of systems I'd architected before they learned to drive. The irony wasn't lost on me. My computer screen displayed the usual flood of notifications. Slack messages from junior developers asking me to review their code, emails from other departments begging me to fix problems they'd created, a calendar reminder for the weekly architecture meeting where I'd explain once again why certain approaches wouldn't work at enterprise scale. Next to my keyboard sat a photo of my family taken last summer. Michael looking tired but smiling after working double shifts at the hospital where he was a nurse. Sophia, my 18-year-old daughter, excited about starting at Boston University, where her tuition had just increased 15% for the second year running. Ethan, my 16-year-old son, already stressed about college applications and the crushing debt that awaited him. Healthcare premiums were eating 28% of my take-home pay. Michael's hospital had cut benefits, meaning we were paying more out of pocket for prescriptions. Sophia's education was draining our savings faster than I could replenish them. Ethan was looking at engineering schools that cost $70,000 a year. And here I was, being laughed at for asking for an 8% raise after 14 years of service. Meanwhile, Nicole had just bought her second vacation home, according to the company newsletter, a beach house in Nantucket to go with her penthouse in Back Bay. The same newsletter that featured a photo of her accepting an innovation award for the data architecture framework I'd designed. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small leather notebook I'd kept for years. The cover was worn from handling, filled with ideas I jotted down during lunch breaks, weekend thoughts, solutions that came to me during my commute. Inside were my personal projects, documented meticulously with dates, development notes, and implementation details. This wasn't company property. This was my intellectual playground. The notebook contained algorithms I'd written on my home computer data models. I'd refined in my home office on weekends machine learning frameworks. I'd trained, using my own hardware code, that Cloud Core had implemented without formal acquisition, because I'd been too trusting. Too eager to be seen, as a team player too naive, to understand that corporate loyalty was a one-way street. I flipped through the pages, each entry a reminder of nights and weekends spent building the future while my family slept, page after page of innovations that had become the backbone of Cloud Core's competitive advantage. The irony was bitter. Nicole saw me as outdated, but every major system keeping her company ahead of competitors had originated in this notebook. I stopped at my notes from March 2020, a series of predictive analytics algorithms for customer behavior modeling that I developed during the pandemic lockdown. At the top of the page, written in my own handwriting, Personal Project, Advanced Customer Analytics Using Neural Networks, developed on Home System 3.15.20. Below it, detailed Git commit logs from my personal GitHub account, time-stamped and documented. What Nicole never knew, what Cloud Core's legal department had been too careless to investigate, was that I'd never signed over the rights to these personal innovations. The standard employment contract I'd signed 14 years ago covered work done during company time using company resources. But my most valuable creations lived in a legal gray area, personal projects developed on my equipment during my time. I pulled up my personal GitHub account on my phone, scrolling through repositories I'd created over the years. Hundreds of commits, thousands of lines of code, all time-stamped and documented. The predictive analytics system that drove Cloud Core's revenue growth, originally developed as a weekend project to analyze my household budget patterns. The data optimization framework that earned Nicole that innovation award, I'd built the core algorithms while experimenting with organizing my daughter's research papers. Every major breakthrough that CloudCore claimed as their intellectual property had started as my personal curiosity, my private tinkering, my unpaid passion for solving complex problems. I'd shared these innovations with the company out of loyalty, never thinking to protect my own interests, never imagining that the company I'd helped build would one day laugh at my request for fair compensation. My computer pinged with another email from HR about the quarterly company newsletter. The headline made my stomach turn. CloudCore's revolutionary analytics platform wins industry recognition. There was Nicole's photo again, accepting another award for work that had kept me awake for months. The article quoted her talking about fostering innovation and building breakthrough technology without mentioning a single member of the engineering team. I thought about my mother, who'd worked 32 years as an executive assistant before they replaced her with project management software. Loyalty matters, she'd always said. Take care of the company, and the company will take care of you. She'd believed that right up until the day they handed her a severance check and a generic thank you card. My father had echoed the same sentiment, working as an accountant for 40 years at a firm that let him go when he turned 62. They'd given him a plaque and walked him out the same afternoon. Companies don't care about loyalty anymore, he'd told me afterward. They care about quarterly profits. I should have listened to them both. Instead, I'd spent 14 years building someone else's empire, believing that hard work and dedication would eventually be rewarded. Nicole's laughter had shattered that illusion like glass. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd saved but never used. Jennifer Martinez, VP of Data Engineering at TechStream Solutions, CloudCore's biggest competitor. We'd connected at a conference 2 years ago after she'd approached me following my presentation on enterprise data architecture. Her messages had been persistent but respectful, always professional. Her last LinkedIn message, sent just 5 months ago, was still unread. Diana, I've been following CloudCore's analytics innovations, and I know talent when I see it. The offer still stands whenever you're ready to have a real conversation. We value experience here, not just energy. We believe wisdom and innovation go hand in hand. At the time, I'd been flattered but dismissive. I was loyal to CloudCore. I believed in the mission. I thought Nicole, despite her youth and corporate speak, understood my value to the organization. How naive that seemed now. My fingers hovered over the call button. 14 years of corporate conditioning screamed at me to stop, to be reasonable, to not burn bridges. What if this was just a bad day? What if Nicole reconsidered? What if I could find a way to work within the system instead of abandoning it? Then I remembered her words. Maybe it's time to think seriously about early retirement. The dismissive wave of her hand, the way she'd talked about me like I was a piece of outdated equipment that needed to be recycled, the complete lack of respect for everything I'd built for this company. I thought about Michael working double shifts because we needed the extra income. About Sophia worrying about student loans instead of enjoying her first year of college. About Ethan, who'd already started talking about taking a gap year because he didn't want to burden us with debt. My family deserved better than a mother who accepted being undervalued. They deserved someone who fought for what she was worth, who refused to be discarded like outdated hardware. Nicole had made it clear that loyalty meant nothing to her. Maybe it was time to show her what disloyalty looked like. I pressed call. Jennifer Martinez speaking. The voice was warm, professional, with none of the artificial corporate enthusiasm I'd grown used to at CloudCore. Real confidence, not the manufactured kind that came from MBA programs. This is Diana Foster from CloudCore. I think it's time we had that conversation you mentioned. There was a pause, then genuine excitement in her voice. Diana, I was beginning to think you'd never call. I've been following your work for years. Are you finally ready to explore opportunities where experience is valued? I looked around the open office at the sea of young faces, bent over their screens at the glass-walled offices, where managers younger than my children made decisions about systems they didn't understand. At the corner office where Nicole was probably already planning how to replace her expensive legacy employee with hungry young talent. I'm ready, I said. When can we meet? How about coffee tomorrow? I know a place in Cambridge where we can talk without interruption. Say 9 a.m. I checked my calendar. Michael had the early shift tomorrow. The kids would be at school. Perfect timing to start planning my future without CloudCore's involvement. I'll be there, I said. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not excitement exactly, but purpose, the feeling that I was finally taking control instead of letting others define my worth. Nicole thought I was replaceable. We were about to find out just how wrong she was. 6 hours later, I sat across from Jennifer Martinez at Café Paradiso in Cambridge, a quiet spot tucked away from the tech crowds. She'd chosen a corner table with privacy, respecting the sensitivity of our conversation. That told me everything I needed to know about TechStream's professionalism. Jennifer was in her early 50s, gray streaks in her dark hair worn like badges of honor, dressed in a sharp blazer over a simple blouse. No corporate uniform, no power suit. She looked like someone who'd built systems with her hands before she'd learned to manage budgets. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who didn't need to prove anything. "I've been following your work for years, Diana," Jennifer said, studying me over her cappuccino. Or rather, I've been following the sudden leaps in CloudCore's data capabilities that mysteriously coincided with your project timelines on LinkedIn. That predictive analytics system for the retail sector expansion, my team tried to reverse engineer the approach for 8 months and couldn't crack it. I felt a knot in my stomach mixed with pride. Someone had actually noticed. Someone understood the technical complexity of what I'd built. "How did you know that was mine?" Jennifer smiled and took a sip of her coffee. "Because Nicole Carter doesn't have the technical background to understand even the basics of machine learning algorithms, let alone architect them. I've seen her speak at conferences. She's great at buzzwords, terrible at substance. And because innovation doesn't just happen by accident. Someone with deep expertise had to build those systems." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Plus, I have contacts throughout the industry. People talk. Your reputation among actual engineers is solid gold, even if management doesn't seem to recognize it. Half the data architects in Boston know your work, even if they've never met you." I took a sip of my latte, gathering my thoughts. The cafe buzzed with conversations about startups and venture capital, the soundtrack of an industry that worshipped youth and disruption. Here I was, a 46-year-old engineer in a world that thought innovation stopped at 35. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked. "Senior Engineering Director position, oversight of our entire data architecture division. Base salary $325,000, full equity package that'll vest over 4 years, and a team of 6 senior engineers. Emphasis on senior. Average age on the team is 43. We believe experience creates better architecture than enthusiasm." My breath caught. 325,000 was nearly 2.5 times my current salary, enough to pay for Sophia's education without touching our retirement savings, enough to send Ethan to engineering school without drowning in debt, enough to finally stop choosing between financial security and family needs. But more importantly, Jennifer continued recognition. Your name on patents, your picture in trade publications, credit for the innovations you create. We're not interested in managers taking credit for engineering work." She paused, studying my expression. "And if you brought your personal innovations with you, theoretical systems you developed on your own time using your own resources, we have a proper IP acquisition process. Fair market compensation for proven technology." Something flickered in Jennifer's eyes, understanding. She'd done her homework, knew about the legal gray areas that bigger companies often ignored. TechStream wasn't just offering me a job. They were offering to properly value intellectual property that CloudCore had taken for granted. I pulled out my leather notebook and placed it on the table between us. "I have Git commits and development documentation proving these systems were personal projects. CloudCore implemented them, but they never formally acquired the rights." Jennifer's eyes widened as she flipped through pages of algorithms, each entry dated and documented. Years of weekend work, personal passion projects that had become the foundation of CloudCore's competitive advantage. This is comprehensive. How much of CloudCore's data infrastructure is based on your personal work? About 65%, I said quietly. The core predictive algorithms, the customer behavior models, the automated optimization systems, all developed in my home office before the company implemented them. Jennifer closed the notebook and met my eyes. That's quite an oversight on their legal team's part. Nicole doesn't value senior functions, I said, echoing the CEO's dismissive attitude, including legal. Apparently, she's too focused on hiring fresh talent to worry about protecting existing assets. We spent the next 3 hours discussing technical details, team structures, and project timelines. Jennifer understood the complexity of enterprise-scale systems in a way that Nicole never had. She asked intelligent questions about scalability, data integrity trade-offs, and implementation challenges. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to someone who respected both my experience and my potential. By the time lunch arrived, we'd outlined a transition plan that would bring my personal innovations to TechStream while staying within legal boundaries. Everything documented, everything transparent, everything Nicole should have done years ago if she'd valued long-term relationships over short-term savings. 2 weeks later, I placed my resignation letter on Nicole's desk. The irony wasn't lost on me, printed on company letterhead, submitted through official channels, following every protocol she claimed to value. Professional to the end, even as I prepared to dismantle everything she thought she owned. She barely looked up from her laptop, her attention split between emails and a video conference she'd muted, the multitasking that passed for leadership in her generation. 2 weeks' notice. She scanned the letter quickly. Where are you going? I'd considered lying, crafting some story about consulting or taking time off, but truth had more impact, and I was done protecting her feelings. TechStream Solutions. That got her attention. Her head snapped up from the screen, eyes narrowing with the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her since the morning's humiliation. Our biggest competitor. That's unfortunate timing. We're in final negotiations with the retail consortium to expand our analytics contract. I know, I said simply. I built the predictive model that won us that contract. Nicole's expression shifted from surprise to something resembling concern, maybe even fear. For the first time, I saw her calculating what my departure might actually cost the company. We should discuss retention options immediately, she said, her voice suddenly urgent. Perhaps that raise you mentioned, maybe 12% plus a promotion to VP level. The offer was everything I'd wanted that morning, more than I'd dared to ask for. If she'd shown this flexibility 8 hours earlier, none of this would have happened. But some doors once closed can't be reopened with money alone. The offer from TechStream is $325,000 plus equity, I said. But more importantly, they value experience over age bias. She laughed, but it sounded hollow now, nothing like the confident dismissal from her office. They're overpaying by at least $100,000. You'll be disappointed when they realize a 46-year-old engineer can't adapt to their development pace. I smiled, feeling that strange new confidence that came from finally knowing my worth. We'll see who's disappointed. My last 2 weeks at CloudCore were surreal. Suddenly, people who'd barely acknowledged me for years wanted to take me to lunch, pick my brain about projects, understand systems they'd ignored. Middle management scrambled to document processes they'd never bothered to learn, realizing too late that institutional knowledge walked out the door with the people who created it. I completed every transition document with professional thoroughness, trained my replacement, a 27-year-old named Ashley who seemed both eager and terrified, and backed up all my personal project documentation. I also made careful copies of every email where I'd shared innovations with the company, creating an evidence trail of CloudCore's failure to properly acquire what they'd freely used. I walked out of CloudCore's glass headquarters for the last time at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday in April. By Monday morning, I was sitting in my new corner office at TechStream, explaining to my team of 6 senior engineers how we were going to revolutionize enterprise data architecture. Real engineers with real experience. The oldest was 54, the youngest was 39. People who understood that wisdom and energy weren't mutually exclusive. 8 weeks later, the first implementation of my analytics framework went live at TechStream. The same algorithms Nicole had dismissed as outdated legacy thinking were now predicting customer behavior patterns 78 hours before they materialized. Processing speeds increased 42%. Accuracy rates improved by 67%. Our sales team had data proving we could outperform CloudCore's best metrics by significant margins. The machine learning models I'd trained in my home office were forecasting market trends with 96% accuracy. The predictive system that had driven CloudCore's growth was now driving TechStream's clients even further, with my name properly credited on every patent filing. For the first time in 14 years, my innovations belonged to me, legally and professionally. The morning the retail consortium announced they were terminating their contract with CloudCore and switching to TechStream, my phone started ringing. First call was from a trade publication wanting to interview the architect behind TechStream's analytics breakthrough. Second call was from an investment firm interested in licensing our predictive technology. Third call was from Nicole. I let it go to voicemail. She called 9 more times over 3 days before leaving a message that I saved for posterity. Diana, this is Nicole. We need to discuss consulting opportunities immediately. CloudCore is prepared to offer a substantial compensation package for your expertise. Please call me back as soon as possible. We made a mistake. The admission felt hollow, too little, too late, motivated by panic rather than recognition. I didn't return the call. 5 days later, Nicole was waiting beside my car in the TechStream parking garage. She looked different, tired, stressed, none of the polished confidence from that morning when she'd laughed at my raise request. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we both knew it. This is inappropriate, I said, maintaining distance while fishing for my car keys. You've put 160 jobs at risk, she said, her voice urgent and desperate. CloudCore is facing an existential crisis because of the intellectual property you took. I didn't take anything that belonged to CloudCore, I replied calmly. I took my personal intellectual property that CloudCore used without proper acquisition. Your legal team never did their due diligence, and you never valued experienced personnel enough to care about the details. Nicole stepped closer, desperation evident in her bloodshot eyes. She'd probably been working 20-hour days trying to contain the damage. Name your price. Whatever TechStream is paying, we'll double it, triple it. We'll make you CTO, give you equity, whatever you want. I thought about those 14 years sitting in that cubicle while she collected bonuses for my work. About the morning she dismissed me like obsolete hardware, about my family's financial struggles, and my children's educational dreams that her 8% refusal had jeopardized. You once told me everyone's replaceable, I said quietly, even senior engineers. I'm just following your business philosophy. The following quarter, CloudCore's stock fell 43%. They laid off 160 employees in 2 waves, targeting senior staff with the highest salaries first. The tech media described it as a catastrophic loss of institutional knowledge and mysterious deterioration of their award-winning analytics systems. Industry analysts wrote case studies about the dangers of undervaluing experienced talent in competitive markets. Nicole resigned under pressure from the board after their stock hit a 4-year low. Her replacement was a 57-year-old former Oracle executive who immediately began trying to poach senior engineers from competitors. Too late. The damage to CloudCore's reputation in the engineering community was irreversible. Then came the inevitable lawsuit. CloudCore sued me for theft of intellectual property, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty. Their case collapsed spectacularly when my documentation proved conclusively that I'd developed the core algorithms as personal projects. The judge not only dismissed their claims, but awarded me legal fees, noting that CloudCore had failed to secure proper ownership of innovations they'd implemented. But victory felt more complex than I'd expected. 4 months after the lawsuit ended, Marcus Chen, CloudCore's former head of client services, visited my office. He'd been with the company for 11 years before the layoffs, someone I'd shared coffee with, and complained about management decisions alongside. 160 people lost their jobs, Diana, he said, sitting across from my desk. People with families, mortgages, kids in college. Was your revenge worth destroying their livelihoods? The question hit harder than any lawsuit. I'd focused so intently on Nicole's arrogance that I'd underestimated the collateral damage. "You're right to be angry," I said. That's why TechStream has hired 84 former CloudCore employees in the last 5 months, including everyone from your client services team who wanted to join us. Marcus's expression softened slightly. "And the others? The ones who can't relocate, who are too specialized, who are close to retirement." That conversation led to the creation of Experience Valued. TechStream's formal initiative targeting displaced senior professionals industry-wide. We partnered with 4 retraining organizations to offer skills updates for engineers over 40. We created consulting opportunities for near-retirement professionals who wanted flexible arrangements. We became the first major tech company to explicitly reject age bias in hiring. The program became a model for the industry. Other companies began questioning their own youth-obsessed hiring practices. Within 18 months, applications to our open positions increased 380%, with experienced professionals specifically seeking out companies that valued their expertise over their energy levels. 10 months after leaving CloudCore, I received the Women in Technology Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to enterprise data architecture. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience full of gray-haired engineers and young developers working together, I thought about Nicole's comment about early retirement. She'd been wrong about everything. We weren't expensive legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches. We were battle-tested professionals who understood the difference between moving fast and building systems that actually work long-term. When you combine decades of hard-won experience with the motivation to prove doubters wrong, you create something pretty unstoppable. 15 months later, I still think about that morning in Nicole's office, not with anger anymore, but with something approaching gratitude. Her laughter taught me the most valuable lesson of my career: your loyalty means nothing if you don't value yourself first. The gray hair she saw as a liability turned out to be my competitive advantage. Last month, CloudCore made headlines again, being acquired by a private equity firm at a fraction of their peak valuation. The company I'd helped build from 40 employees to 1,500 was dismantled, sold off in pieces. Leadership that confused energy with competence, disruption with innovation, had finally run its course. If you're reading this and you're over 40, dealing with managers who think your experience is expensive rather than valuable, remember something. Your knowledge isn't just worth defending, it's worth fighting for. Document your work, understand your legal rights, and never let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to become invisible. Age isn't a weakness in tech, it's wisdom waiting to be unleashed. And when experience finally gets angry enough to demand respect, industries change. The algorithms are still running. My name is on the patents. And somewhere in Boston, a CEO is learning not to laugh at senior engineers asking for their worth.